There are a few universal truths in this world that just about everyone can agree on. 1. Socks disappear in the laundry just to mess with you. 2. The moment you sit down, someone will ask you to do something. And 3. Anytime a woman starts a sentence with "a real man would," you know what follows is going to be completely unhinged. To that list, we can now add this. The live-action Snow White remake was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the worst creative decisions in the history of entertainment. Possibly the most predictable disaster of all time, a project doomed from conception, cast with the wrong people, pushing the wrong message, and telling the wrong story. After all the delays, the controversies, the speculation that's lingered for what feels like a lifetime, it was oddly surreal to finally sit down and watch it. Like meeting a celebrity you followed for years, except not a beloved celebrity, more like the kind you're warned never to be alone in a room with. And now that I've endured nearly 2 hours of this cinematic car crash, I can confirm, yes, it's just as bad as everyone feared. In some ways, it's even worse. A bloated, confused, cringe-inducing production, dragged down by wooden acting, cheap costumes, bargain bin CGI, and cinematography that could trigger nausea. It butchers most of the iconic elements from the original animated film, discards themes like self-sacrifice, heroism, and true love, and replaces them with half-baked messaging so self-contradictory even the film gives up on it by the end. The reshoots and rewrites are painfully obvious. Characters, subplots, and setups are introduced, then dropped without a second thought. The climax is so anticlimactic and jarring it makes World War Z look like a masterclass in structure and pacing. But let's just get through the plot summary, so we can bury this mess and move on. The basic setup follows the original, at least loosely. Snow White is born to the benevolent king and queen of a generic fantasy kingdom, which goes unnamed but must have excellent global transport links, because the population is more ethnically diverse than central London. Her mother dies. Her father remarries. His new wife, played by Gal Gadot, sends him off to war, where he vanishes without a trace. Fast forward a few years, and the kingdom has descended into a bleak dystopia. Poverty is rampant, hope is scarce, and the queen rules with an iron grip. It's like modern Britain, only with better dentistry. After Snow White confronts the queen over a bandit named Jonathan, who tried to steal food from the castle, the queen decides to have her eliminated. She sends her off into the woods with a huntsman under orders to kill her. A bit of an overreaction, but fine. Of course, the huntsman changes his mind and lets her go. Snow White then stumbles upon the dwarves. Except they're not really dwarves. They're creatures. The kind of things H.P. Lovecraft might have hallucinated on a bad trip. The glimpses we got in the trailers didn't prepare anyone for how grotesque they are on screen, like waking up at 3 a.m. and seeing something in the corner of your room watching you, unmoving, soulless, smiling. Snow White crashes at their place, eats their food, and then demands they clean up their own house while she twirls around like she's starring in a psychedelic musical. Which, in her defense, would probably make more sense than this movie. For reasons known only to her and the screenwriters, she suddenly decides her dad might still be alive, and that the best way to find him is to track down the forest bandits. Sure, why not? And just like that, Jonathan appears, because the plot needs to happen. He takes an arrow for her during a skirmish with the Queen's soldiers, so she brings him back to the dwarves to patch him up. Now remember those Starbucks barista-looking guys from the set photos everyone mocked online? Yeah, those aren't the dwarves, they're the bandits. Out-of-work actors turned thieves after the Queen's taxation policies destroyed their industry. Not sure if that's supposed to be a commentary on anything. If it is, it's buried under several layers of confusion. Jonathan tries to distract the soldiers to buy Snow White time, gets captured immediately, and the Queen, understandably, loses patience. She transforms into the classic old hag disguise and tricks Snow White into eating the poisoned apple. Predictable, but at least it tracks. Jonathan escapes prison just in time to deliver the world's most lifeless kiss, which revives Snow White so she can initiate her plan to overthrow the Queen. Now brace yourself for the brilliance of this master strategy. Are you ready? She walks into town and remembers the soldiers' names. That's it. That's the plan. She reminds the guards that she knows who they are, and this apparently breaks a spell or stirs their hearts or something equally vague and unearned. They turn on the Queen. The Queen freaks out, smashes the magic mirror, turns into glass, and shatters. Snow White becomes Queen. The end. Happily ever after. There's a lot more to unpack here, but first, positives. Yes, there are a few. Surprisingly, most of them have to do with Rachel Zegler. Now, I'm not here to defend her public persona, but credit where it's due, she's not terrible as Snow White. Her costume looks like a budget cosplay, her haircut is about 2 weeks away from tax accountant in a crisis, and her performance occasionally veers into musical theater melodrama. Still, she clearly gives it her best, and she can sing, really sing. Her musical numbers, for all the awkward staging around them, are solid. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for Gal Gadot. It's genuinely painful to admit, but she just doesn't have the range or presence to pull off a Disney villain. Her line delivery manages to be both stiff and overly dramatic, and when the script calls for her to sing, you can practically hear the exact moment her voice gets dubbed over by someone with actual talent. Jonathan is another entry in the ever-growing catalog of forgettable, emasculated male sidekicks. Occasionally he seems on the verge of showing courage or backbone, but the film quickly reels it in. Can't risk him upstaging the lead. Visually, the movie is a mess. The CGI dwarves are a walking nightmare. The castle and town scenes are steeped in a joyless gray that feels like a Zack Snyder parody. And the forest scenes are saturated with such an aggressive golden filter it starts to hurt your eyes. At one point, there's a scene shot in a real forest, and the sudden shift in color and realism is so stark, I genuinely thought we'd changed dimensions. You can also spot the reshoots from a mile away. The kiss scene, clearly added after backlash from fans of the original. Snow White herself is noticeably toned down in some scenes, as though someone realized halfway through editing that she was coming off as unbearable. The bandits? Half of them don't speak, and they barely do anything. It's like they were cut out in post, but not quite all the way. The biggest issue, though, is the ending. In the original, the dwarves rally together to confront the evil queen, reinforcing themes of loyalty, kindness, and teamwork. Here, Snow White does everything herself. The dwarves, the bandits, even Jonathan, they just stand around and watch. Which begs the question, what is this movie trying to say? It wants to push themes of shared responsibility and empowerment, but when it matters most, everyone else fades into the background while Snow White handles everything solo. The message contradicts itself at every turn, stumbling over the very cliches it's trying to subvert. In the end, Snow White is a confused, poorly conceived, poorly executed mess. A film that was always destined to fail, and now that it's finally out, we can all breathe a sigh of relief, toss it onto the pile of failed reboots, and move on with our lives. Do yourself a favor, save your time, your money, and your sanity. Go watch the original instead.